lecture 27, lecture B. This will be the last lecture for 27. I'll get through this today pretty quickly. There is no reaction quiz this week. It'll just be a normal Chapter 720 quiz. Hopefully early next week I'll get the final study guide out. I think pretty much everyone I'll go through has turned in their paper. It will take me some days to get through that. Hopefully over Easter break I'll try to knock some of that out. I look forward to reading those papers maybe and getting those done and over with. But it'll take me some time. I will have all grades completed in a couple weeks, and I've been trying to keep off-campus people updated on where they stand on their grades. So, okay, culture wars. We left off talking about Bill Clinton the other day and globalization in the 90s economy. The newest immigrant between 1965 and 2010, nearly 38 million immigrants entered the United States. About 50% came from Latin America and the Caribbean. The largest, or the immigrant influx changed the country's religious and racial map. 4 million Muslims also entered. This is also where you get the rise of the Latino, and now one of our major dividing points in this country. Latinos formed the basis for the largest single immigrant group. Invented in the United States to describe Mexicans, Central and South Americans, and Spanish-speaking Caribbean island nations. Latino is really just Central Latin American individuals. Mexico has become the world's largest speaking Spanish country in the world. Mexican Americans are the largest portion of this significant group and have had a huge impact on especially the southern United States. Numbering around 50 million in 2010, became the largest minority group in the United States. In 2010, poverty rate stood nearly double that of other groups. Asian Americans' soul became increasingly visible as well. Poured into American colleges and universities, where you see a heavier percentage of Asian Americans. Interracial marriages are more commonplace now, and there's a lot of intermarrying, especially Hispanics and whites. By 2050, predicted that less than 50% of the population will be what you characterize as Caucasian or white. So, culture wars have definitely had a huge thing. Culture wars, too, the changing face of Black America. Growing visibility of African American society with removal of segregation between the 70s and 2010. Elements of African American diaspora, natives of African. Let's see here. Could be seen across the whole thing. So all the descendants of these slaves across America now have been kind of assimilated into American culture. That dysphoria, now you have so many different African Americans, their heritage. Today they're kind of blended into the American culture, but like knowing their exact heritage, where they exactly came from, is sometimes difficult to prove or find out unless you do one of the DNA analysis or have a good written history, which most of them aren't going to have a good written history. Now, most African Americans still remain in more precarious situation than whites, and housing patterns have resulted in default segregation in many cities. During the rise of imprisonment, during the 60s, the nation's prison populations have declined, but in the 70s, crime rates, drug usage will increase, and with politicians seeking to be tough on crime, they'll treat drug addiction as a violation of law rather than disease. So between the 70s and 80s, you're going to see a huge uptick in prisons, especially African Americans and minorities. By the 90s, this will decrease. Percentage of the black population in prison stood 5 times higher than that of whites. Beating of Rodney King protest riots in LA, one of the highlights of this whole crackdown on crime and the insurge of African Americans can be highlighted best probably from the Rodney Kings, in which he did resist an arrest. There was some fault on his end, but he was badly beaten to a pulp by the LA police, which resulted in riots, and was all caught on film. So this is going to lead to riots in the early 90s, and which shows that there is still a lot of racial divide even in this country today. Our best example can be seen today after the Ferguson incident with Michael Brown, and so there is still a deep problem in this country over that. Culture Wars 3, the Continuing Rights Revolution. Americans with Disability Act prohibited discrimination in hiring and promotions against persons with disabilities. And also you have the, now if you go to a building, a doorway has to be a certain width, right? New construction, public buildings have to meet certain standards and have ramps. Gay rights. Gay rights really took a hit in the 80s of the AIDS epidemic and safe blood. But by the early 20th century and even to this day, rapid tolerance and perceptions have changed drastically on gay rights. In the last really 15 years, it has really shifted to It used to be stood about 30-40% of Americans support it. Now it's over definitely 50%. I wouldn't say it's 60 or 70, but it's definitely increased drastically over the last 15 years. Native Americans in the new century increase in population and pride in their heritage. Casinos, that's kind of the economic standing or how reservations are able to get a lot more money into their reservations is by giving African or Native Americans monopolies on casinos. And we have a couple that are not too far from us here across the way in Kansas. One thing of note too of Native Americans, there's a growing number of activism by them. Like one of the first Kansans here recently, who happens to be gay, which is ironic enough, is gay and a Native American, one of the first congressmen elected that's a member of a reservation, like an active member of a tribe this past election cycle. Multiculturalism is a new term that came about in the 90s. The presence of or support of the presence of several distinct cultures or ethnic groups within a society. This led to harsh debates of how many subjects are immigrant children. During the 90s, it appeared that the country was fighting old battles between traditional religion and modern secular culture. So people say, we need to be multiculturalists. We got to say, no, we need to be traditionalists. There's a culture war still going on to this day about do traditional values, traditional way of thinking go over new waves. The biggest one you're seeing right now, gay rights, is kind of stabilized. The big one you're seeing now is transgender. And that one has not received as much support as gay rights had. There's still a lot of more dissent on that one. And I don't know if there's going to be an easy fix to that one moving forward or even an easy solution to appease all sides. We'll see what happens. The impeachment and election of Bill. Oh, I think I forgot one point down there. I don't think it got onto the slide. Yeah, it's not up here on the PowerPoints, but before the impeachment, there was anti-government extremes in the 90s. You have the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995, in which Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building, and then in '93 you had the Waco incident, in which David Koresh and his I can't remember the name of the group.
His posse.
Yeah, what was it?
His family.
No, it was. He called it his family, but it was like, what was their name? It's on the. Well, actually, if I look at the back of my board, hang on. Actually, I think it was a word of the week. Oh, something Branch Davidians. There it goes. It was a word of the week. Branch Davidians was their name. They were a super strict religious cult that believed David Koresh was like a prophet, and he had multiple. Anyway, there's going to be a lot of anti-government movements in the 90s, and Waco, which resulted in their compound being burned down, and then the Oklahoma City bombing in '95 were huge things. Now, the impeachment of Bill Clinton. This is one thing that everyone, I think, knows about Bill Clinton. He had an affair. And charges of misconduct have been bedeviled him since taking office. If you watch Clinton, which is one of the weirdest things, I think, is you study Bill Clinton. As a president, he had a lot of good policies, but he always had constantly misconduct, even when he was a governor of Arkansas around him. And today, that the Clintons can be so closely associated with like movements and stuff about like equality and like the Me Too movement and stuff is baffling to me, because if you look through this, Bill Clinton has the whole MO of taking advantage of women at certain situations. Not saying he wasn't an okay president and that he was a predator, but like this whole debate right now, he is like fitting everything that his party and even his wife is saying is wrong. So I think that's one of the most ironic things, and it's not talked about. Like, it is not talked about. It's like, yeah, Clinton did all this wrong, but he's the golden boy, right? We're not going to hold him accountable. That's something that just baffles me. Even the textbook kind of goes to that. And I'm just like, really? We're going to hold him to a different standard? I don't know. It baffles me. Charges of misconduct have been, like I said, going on for a long time. 1998, affair of Monica Lewinsky became known. Now, he didn't necessarily have a full-on affair with her, but there was there was some things that happened. Incidents that happened between the two. Kenneth Starr was appointed as a special prosecutor to investigate the scandal. Republican House voted to impeach Clinton, and over perjury and obstruction of justice. It will fail in the Senate, but basically what Kenneth Starr proved was Clinton lied under oath. He went on television and said he didn't have a relationship with that woman, and he lied under oath. So they got him for perjury because it came out. They produced a dress with physical evidence. We'll leave it at that. And finally, Clinton admitted to the indiscretion later on because they had the evidence. But either case, this will hurt Clinton in his last couple years as president because now the whole Monica incident. There's a picture of Monica Lewinsky. She was an intern at the White House at the time. She was 20, 21, not very old.
How old is he?
He was in his 50s.
Oh.
I think, or upper 40s, low 50s. He's a baby boomer. He's 70-something years now, and this is about 20 years ago. So he would have been in his late 40s, early 50s.
So she's like in her 60s?
She's in her 40s.
50s?
She's 42.
She's 20.
Yeah, she's still pretty young. She's only in her low 40s. But she was 22, 21, somewhere in there when the incident occurred.
29.
Now she's a household name across the United States if you study anything about American history, especially of 90s. Now, this is going to lead over, so Clinton is obviously barred from running because of the amendment. He might have still won because he was well liked overall for his policies. Al Gore, as vice president, runs for president and took the first Jewish candidate ever, Joe Lieberman, as vice president. Very close election. Republicans nominated George W. Bush, governor of Texas, and Dick Cheney, former Secretary of Defense under, I think, Reagan or Bush 41. One of the closest elections in the nation's history, Bush barely wins. You'll have the Florida debacle. Florida came down to a few votes. They did a recount later, and I know this is talked about a lot, but Bush still ended up winning after the recount. Bush versus Gore was a court case in which they were trying to get as many recounts possible. Finally, the Supreme Court stepped in and said all results must be valid. Basically, whatever we have now is what we're going forward with. And like I said, after even private recounts after the fact showed that Bush still won the election. Either case, Bush slightly lost the popular vote, but won the electoral vote slightly as well. So it was a super close election. I mean, we're talking a couple 100,000 votes separate the two. That's pretty significant. A challenge democracy. Bush won the White House with winning the popular vote, outdating voting system. We needed to rectify that. $1.5 billion campaign cost for all, a very expensive campaign, and voter disengagement from public life was evident. Our voting percentage in this election was actually pretty low, but everything's going to change after the election pretty dramatically, which we'll talk about for our last chapter. You can see the Chads, the voting, checking all the votes, hand count, how debacle this was. And they were literally hand counting all these votes again. We did not know who the President of the United States was officially for about a month after the election. I actually stayed up to 2 or 3 in the morning. And when I finally went to bed, I was a junior high kid. I was a nerd. I like history stuff. The best guess was Bush had won, but there was a recount going on. You can see very close election. Bush won more states. But because of the population way it goes in the United States, obviously, you can win less states and win the election.
It was like this election close. It was like that.
Yeah, I mean, similar to this election. I mean, if you look at the states won, I think Trump won 5 or 7 more states than Hillary did. And so, but the population of the United States Electoral College just tries to even that out as far as that. Nope. September 11th. As we draw this chapter to a close, September 11th was a beautiful day. One of the nicest fall days I can actually remember. But then September 11th happened. Group Al-Qaeda had been organizing this for over a year. Seized 4 planes. Actually, they were trying to get 5, but 2 of the terrorists were detained before this whole operation even went under. But 4 planes were seized. Flew 2 into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and 1 into a field. Flight 93 that was hijacked, but then the passengers revolted, and it's believed the hijackers purposely drove the plane into the ground, which they believed their target was either the Capitol building or the White House. Either case, Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, that targeted the United States, they were angry about their interference in the Persian Gulf War, and their staying in the Middle East. And so this was retaliation for that, and just an agenda against the American-led West. Either case, September 11th will fundamentally shift the generation, my generation, and even your generation to some degree, because there's a chance, Dalton, as you enlisted into the military now, I mean, you could be directly affected by what's going on still in Afghanistan today. We're still in Afghanistan today. We've been in Afghanistan since 2001. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, or Enduring Freedom as well, in 2006 to 7. And I know we've got relatives, fathers, or others that have served as well. But this war has fundamentally shifted the whole generation of America. And frankly, we're tired. I'll be honest. I'm tired in the military. We had a purpose, but now it's like terrorism is not an easy war. The difference here was we were not attacked by a country, we were attacked by a group. And that makes fighting it much more difficult. So as we get into the 21st century and talk about the age of Bush and Obama and even into Trump a little bit, as we close this chapter, September 11th is something I think a lot of Americans have tended to forget about now. Most of you that have taken this class were not alive during it or were very young. And it's one event that really impacted my life. So with that being said, make sure you've got everything turned in. Chapter 27 quiz I may post this afternoon. Get it out there early for you. Make sure your papers are turned in through the Google Drive. Have a great Easter weekend, spring break. And we'll see you next week.